Hey everyone, welcome to the Counterspark webinar, the 2024 elections and how they're going to affect clean energy. We're really glad to have you here today. We're going to give just another minute or two to let folks trickle in, and then we will get started. If anyone's trickled in, we're about to get started. We'll give it till 3 after. It's 12:02 now on my computer, so. All right, we'll go ahead and get started now. Welcome everyone to our webinar about the 2024 elections and clean energy. We really appreciate you being here today. I'm Amanda and I am the digital director at Counterspark. And so I am moderating this panel today, but I'm really excited to be joined by these brilliant panelists. Many of you are on the Counterspark email list, and so you may recognize the name Kim Jemaine. She is the managing director of Counterspark and was our political director, so has a great background in politics. And yeah, very excited to have her here today. We also have Megan Jacobs from the League of Conservation Voters, who is the Vice President for Paid Communications and Elections over there. They do so much work with getting people out to vote specifically on climate and clean energy. And we also have Brian Zuzenak, who is a strategic partner at Pivot Group. They are a political firm that specializes in elections, and Brian has a long history of working in elections. All three of these folks have a long history of elections and climate and policy. So it's really cool to have them all here today. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask some questions today. We'll have some questions from the audience. So there's a Q&A thing. So feel free to drop your questions in. We will get to those. If you have an individual question, the panelists will be able to see it. I'll be able to see it. But if it's not relevant, we'll get to you afterwards. If you have a question about this webinar, we'll try to answer that back to you as well. So I'll ask some questions, you ask some questions, and then we'll leave with a final question that I tried to make optimistic. Elections aren't always, so tried to do that. I'm very excited. Today is such a perfect day to have an elections webinar. Today is the final day to register to vote in several states across the country. We have a link at Counterspark that I think my colleague is going to drop into the chat that gives voter information. There's a couple things about voter information there in each state. And then there is a link to the Secretary of State website, the portion in your state that talks about voting. So if you have questions about voting in your state, feel free to hop on that page and look that up. And again, double check. This is the last day to register in a bunch of different states. So I want to make sure we throw that out there at the top of this webinar. I'm getting my ballot in the mail today, so people really are voting. Some votes are already in this year. And the last thing that I want to say before we go ahead and get started with the questions is it's not directly related to clean energy, but people think about clean energy and climate together. So if you are in the path of Hurricane Milton, or we're in the path of Hurricane Helene and are still suffering after effects from that, just want to say very sorry, and we hope that you are all staying safe, and yeah, you and your friends and family. So without further ado, I will go ahead and ask our first question, and this is for the entire group. And when you answer, if you want to give a little bit more background about yourself or your organization as well, we absolutely welcome that. So to kick things off, can you all give a brief snapshot of your organization's theory of change when it comes to elections and electoral engagement? And Kim, I'll go ahead and start with you for that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Amanda. So I'll start with Counterspark's overarching view, which is the belief that the technologies to address climate change already exist. And what we need is decision makers to enact the right policy and regulatory frameworks to expand and proliferate the use of those technologies. As an organization, we are fairly new and we have limited resources. And so we try to identify the spaces and the states and the venues where we can have the biggest impact. So that means those states where there is a ton of market potential to expand clean energy, but also those with narrow margins for clean energy majorities or those near the tipping point to achieve majorities. So that's kind of our overarching belief, and then how we approach elections.
Awesome. Great. And Megan, if you want to introduce yourself or LCV further, League of Conservation Voters is often abbreviated LCV for folks who don't know. But yeah, if you want to give a brief snapshot of LCV's theory of change when it comes to elections and electoral engagement.
Yeah, so I'm Megan. I've been at LCV for about 5 years now, and have been working on campaigns for just about 20 years. I've worked all over the country for candidates, for committees like the DNC or the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. But I'm excited to be at LCV now because I can both continue to work to elect good people while building power for the environmental movement. And that really is LCV's theory of change, a theory of change that investing in elections help us build power to achieve policy success. And so, that is the ultimate goal, passing strong environmental bills, both at the federal and at the non-federal level. I think one of the interesting things about LCV too is we're one of the few electoral organizations that invest in campaigns at all levels of the ballot. We have a network of 30 plus state affiliates, and they do a lot of work in non-federal races. And then at LCV Victory Fund, our federal super PAC, we invest a lot in federal races. And so we work on elections from every level of the ballot, from city council to presidential, and work on electing environmental champions that are going to pass strong policies once they get there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Megan. And Brian, what is, again, if you want to give a little bit more personal background with this, feel free, but would love to know your organization's theory of change when it comes to elections and electoral engagement.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. Brian Zuzenak, strategic partner at the Pivot Group. We specialize in direct mail. We work with organizations, progressive organizations, and candidates and issues across the country. I've been doing political work for over 25 years now, which makes me feel super old. I think from our perspective, we are a political consulting firm, so we tend to sort of focus more on change within the electorate. And for us, in some ways, that has become a test of how rapid change can happen. And I think with social media, with artificial intelligence, you're seeing behaviors of voters in terms of how they consume media and how they consume information change more rapidly than ever before. And so trying to stay on the cusp of that, and trying to stay ahead of that, and whether that's our use of data or we don't use AI for creative, but certainly we're exploring ways about can we use AI for testing as just a way to find out what is continuing, what are those imagery, what are those words that are really going to get voters to do what we want them to do. So it's an interesting world to live in because, things are so in flux in how people are consuming information, but in some ways it feels like the groups that the amount of the electorate that is actually uh, persuadable seems to be shrinking even more than we always thought it was small, and now it feels like it's the smallest it's ever been.
Awesome. Yeah, it is so fascinating to watch things change. I remember when I was in college, it was during the Bush Cheney administration, and now for like Cheney to be coming out for Kamala Harris, it's so fascinating and so interesting to me. So, yeah. Megan, you really focused a lot in your answer on the state and local level elections. So I want to start with you for my next question. Many of us have a sense of the states that are considered swing states for federal elections. I think I probably dreamed about Steve Kornacki talking about Bucks County in Pennsylvania or Maricopa County in Arizona after the last election. But from your perspective, which states are the ones to watch when it comes to action on climate and clean energy?
Well, that seems like more of a nightmare than a dream, but I would say one of our biggest priorities is capturing pro-environment trifectas. And so we were able to do that last cycle with new trifectas in Michigan and Minnesota. And so, that's when we have pro-environment leadership at every level of government, in the governor's office and both legislative chambers. And, we saw within a year and a half, both of those states passed historic climate bills. And so we know that is really the key to passing the biggest action. So we think the next best opportunities for that are in Arizona and Pennsylvania, where in both states we're just a few seats away from taking majorities in the legislature, and we have great leadership in the governor's office. So we are investing heavily in trying to pick up those trifectas. I'll also say another place we are investing more in and working with some of you at Counterspark is public service commissions and public utility commissions. We've been able to make a lot of progress at the local level in places doing that work. We just had success there in Virginia since we were able to take back control of both legislative chambers there and electing public service commissioners that are clean energy champions. We are working on that in places like Arizona, again, with the Arizona Corporation Commission. In Montana, we're trying to make gains. And in some really more Republican places like South Carolina, they have a pretty complex system of nominating candidates there. And Nebraska, where our state affiliate has invested for years in making gains in local public missions and has had amazing success and has passed a lot of pro-clean energy legislation since then.
Awesome. Yeah, at Counterspark, we were really excited when Michigan passed their 100% clean energy standard. So yeah, that is really great to know. And for those who are not aware of what your Public Utilities Commission does, I'm sure you all are since you're on this webinar, but just in case, they do regulate utilities. They are not elected in all states, but I'm glad you brought up Arizona. I know theirs is pretty big on the ballot this year. So great. Brian, I'm going to kick it to you next for this question. And again, it was many of us have a sense of the states that are considered swing states for federal election, but from your perspective, what states are the ones to watch when it comes to action on climate and clean energy?
Yeah, I think Megan did a great job of calling out the key ones, and you look at a place like Michigan, and it's the most evidence of elections matter, right? We managed to get the trifecta. We need to work really hard to make sure we keep it this cycle, but we saw real action out of that. The other things I would highlight, not to get too far ahead of ourselves about what's going to happen this November, but in a place like Virginia, we have the gubernatorial next cycle, and so if we win that and keep the House, we get that trifecta back that we haven't had for a couple of years. In a place where we were making good progress and then weren't making good progress thanks to the governor. And so I think that's really key. The other level of the ballot that I think it continues to be sort of one that a lot of folks are not focused on, much like the Corporation Commission or Public Service Commissions, is the Supreme Courts, the state Supreme Courts. And we've been doing a fair amount of work in state Supreme Court races across the country. And a lot of those are elected positions, and they have huge impact on what we're able to do in the environmental space, in the green energy space. And they're races that aren't really big races, so a small investment goes a long way. And I think about, we're in races in Ohio right now, in North Carolina, in Montana, in Arizona, all the state Supreme Courts that we're trying to, even in Montana, we're up 6-1, but there's 2 members up right now. So those are another level of the ballot that I think are often not talked about, but end up having a huge impact on a variety of issues, including environmental issues.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Every single level of the ballot matters. Yeah. And that cannot be said enough. Your state legislature matters. Your state Supreme Court matters. There aren't a lot of governor's elections this year, although I did see that some of the firms that do, determine whether things are toss-ups or not have just moved my home state of Indiana, their governor's race, to a more competitive stance than previously, which is really something to watch. So awesome. And Kim, back to you. Many of us have a sense of the states that are swing states, but from your perspective, what ones are the ones to watch when it comes to climate and clean energy?
Yeah, not surprised that Megan and Brian already covered most of what I was going to say on the states, but Counterspark is investing in Michigan and Arizona for the exact reasons folks already outlined. Michigan, because some legislators took really bold votes to not only set forward clean energy targets, but also ensure that those projects are being cited quickly and responsibly, and are facing some pushback. So we want to ensure that they get the necessary support. And then in Arizona, like Megan mentioned, there is some opportunity to, just with a couple of seats, potentially pick up majorities in one or both of the state houses there. So trying to do our best with the very complicated electoral campaign laws in Arizona to invest there as well.
Awesome. Yeah, there's new electoral laws in Arizona. Every single state has different election laws. So for those who know much about investing in elections, it keeps it interesting. I also want to call out, before we get to the next question, I do have a couple more, but we do have a Q&A section in the chat or on this webinar. So it should be probably at the bottom of your screen if you're on a laptop or desktop. Feel free to drop something in there at any time, and we will get to them in a little bit. Cool. Our next question, and Brian, I'm going to start with you on this one. You all have a background in messaging on clean energy and have seen what works and what does not. So I imagine there are some people on this call who want their friends and family to vote on clean energy. I'm one of them, honestly. I want my friends and family to vote on clean energy, but they don't work in it every single day like you do. Brian, what messages are you finding are resonating with voters this year?
Yeah, I think, and then I think this is true of the spectrum of issues that are being talked about in the public policy debate today, and it all has an economic focus, and I think there's just so many folks out there who are struggling day to day, who when milk costs an extra 50 cents or eggs, like that has a huge impact on their bottom line, and so I think we have to meet voters where they are and put our messaging in an economic framework, whether that's, talking about price gouging from big oil, or talking about, high paying jobs that green energy can create. I think we have to be in that frame because it's what they're living day to day, and it's really all they want to hear about because it is so impactful to everything in their lives. And any other, they want to, a lot of these voters definitely want to do something about the climate, and they want to see progress on that, but it is just not as in their face as the fact that they could use a raise, or they need to pay a little bit less for all the things in their life.
Absolutely true. I feel fortunate to have a steady job, and I think I make a reasonable amount of money. But yeah, I mean, the groceries are very expensive, and yeah, that definitely is a great point that finances are improved by clean energy. Kim, how about you? What messages are you seeing that would work? How would you talk to your friends and family about this?
Yeah, I think I'll on the first part just echo what Brian mentioned. That's what we're seeing in the polling, and it's not surprising. People can't focus on all of the other issues as much when they're concerned about putting dinner on the table. So that's not surprising at all. So tying clean energy to the cost saving benefits is definitely good. As a step away from inflation and the cost of living, one thing that has worked for as long as I've been working in the environmental, climate, clean energy space is big polluters. So kind of giving people the folks that are responsible for whether it's poor air quality that your kids are breathing, or like Brian said, the folks that are responsible for the increased prices at the gas pump. So that big polluter messaging also works.
Awesome. And Megan, I know you deal with messaging every single day. So sorry to put you last, but I know you are an expert on this. So yeah, what messages are you finding that are resonating with voters on clean energy?
Yeah, I would totally agree with everything. The economy is number one, but thankfully we have found, talking about clean energy investments and how they save costs and create jobs really strengthens the core economic message for Harris and for others at other levels of the ballot. We've done some A/B testing to see if that economic message works better with or without it, and it always works better with it. I think much like the fact that climate change has become nearly impossible to ignore at this point because of all of the impacts, I think the benefits of clean energy are also becoming really hard for even the most ardent anti-environmental Republicans to ignore. We are seeing thousands of jobs, many of them in Republican communities, coming online because of these clean energy investments, and we're seeing real savings for people who are able to take advantage of the benefits and get solar panels or upgrade their appliances. These are real savings people are seeing. I'll also say one other thing we're thinking about more going forward is energy reliability and resiliency. Unfortunately, that is a bigger problem with more extreme weather. But something we're investing in as part of the IRA is modernizing the grid, which we need to do to bring all of these clean energy investments online, but also it's going to have the benefit of getting people more reliable energy. So I think that is another really useful point to bring up.
Yeah, that's an incredible point. Yeah, we talked a little bit about the Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton at the top of this call, and I know our friends in California have been dealing with just a wild heat wave out there. So yeah, like making sure the power stays on is so crucial to keep homes cool or warm, or just to keep the refrigerator running so that that milk that you paid extra for doesn't go bad. All right, I'm gonna I'm gonna ask Brian a different question that's a little bit kind of related to the economy, honestly. About 6 or so years ago, there was a moment in time where climate change broke into the top 5 of relevant issues for voters. But in recent years, it's been bumped a little bit as concerns about cost of living, inflation, jobs, and more rise to the top. How has your firm adjusted to this?
Yeah, I think that goes back to trying to frame issues surrounding climate in ways that voters are ready to hear about them. And again, yes, I would agree with you, Amanda. A few years ago, we were talking about climate as its own issue, right? I mean, like, we need to make progress on climate, and it was resonating with voters. And so now it's not that it's a different issue. It's just that we need to make sure we're feeding it to voters in a way they want to hear about it, or in a way that fits in with their issue priorities. And we're going to continue to see this. You know, there may be a day in the future where climate in and of itself comes back to that sort of top 5 list, or it could be some related issue that pops in, as you know, as more and more people see the direct impacts of climate, whether that's, you know, just action on flooding as an example. So I think it's important to always be mindful of where voters are coming to the conversation from, and how do we adjust. Now, one of the upside downsides of climate is it impacts almost everything. And so it does give us lots of opportunities to frame it in a way that makes sense for voters or meets voters where they are. The downside is obviously it impacts everything. So I think it's just always critical to try to put ourselves in the shoes of voters and figure out what are they most concerned about, and how do we make all of our messages reflect, or be relevant to those issues.
Awesome. And Megan, I'm going to ask you a little bit of a different question. What is at stake in elections this year, both at the federal and state level? It's a big question, but yeah.
Yeah, pretty much everything is at stake, both our democracy and all of the clean energy progress we've made. You know, we've heard Trump say that he wants to repeal the IRA and all of those investments. Thankfully, a lot of them well, I wouldn't say a lot of them. Some of them I don't think he'll be able to, because they've already gone out. Jobs are already being created. Not all of that he'll be able to wind back, but I think they will try very hard to claw back everything they can, every dollar that is unspent. So I know I'm on the independent side of our firewall. I know a lot of my colleagues on the coordinated side are working on that right now to do everything we can to prepare in case that does happen. You know, and it's the same thing at the non-federal level. You know, in Minnesota and in Michigan, the House is up this year. If we lose control there, it's going to be much harder to implement those strong climate bills that we passed.
Awesome. And Kim, same question to you. It is a big question, so I want to get a couple perspectives. What's at stake in elections this year at the federal and state levels?
Yeah, Megan is completely right about the federal legislation and the potential for rollbacks there. I think from kind of a zoomed out perspective, what's top of mind for me is that we're heading into the second half of this decade, which is really pivotal for climate and for action on climate change and for the expansion of clean energy. And so there are many states in the country that have not yet even started on a path to reducing emissions, expanding the siting of clean energy, incentivizing decarbonization, and allowing for all of the transmission that we will need and the build out of that infrastructure that we'll need for clean energy. And so what I'm really focused on and thinking about, and some of the reason why we're investing certain states, is to ensure that at the state level, we're working collectively to expand clean energy as we head toward 2030.
Well, I'm going to ask a couple more questions, but then we are going to get to the questions in the Q&A. We have some good ones there, so but feel free to keep adding them. In elections, people often talk about an October surprise, where something surprising changes the election, but I feel like there's one of those weekly now. So Kim, I'll start with you because I've been ending with you. What would you say about the election today that you would not have said just a month ago?
Yeah, I'll start with a bit of pessimism, which is that I think there has been a lot of change, what kind of in the news cycle and with the way that the momentum around elections is the federal elections is happening, but that hasn't really shown up in polling to the extent that some folks may think. And so I think what's really important, and what I've been thinking about, is the importance of really running through the tape. I think it could be really easy to assume that because folks are in the news, or you see more yard signs, that means that things are in the bag, and that's just not the case. And we'll talk a little bit more about this a bit later, but it's really going to come down to your friends and family, and making sure that they are making it out to the polls. And so just be mindful that there's a lot of work left to do.
That's very true. When I worked on campaigns directly, the one big thing we always said was yard signs don't vote. So make sure those folks with those yard signs get out to vote, and people who don't have yard signs. Megan, same question over to you. What would you say about the election today you wouldn't have said a month ago?
I think we've seen a growing narrative around EVs that is really challenging, particularly in Michigan, where obviously auto production is really important. We've seen Republicans use this as an attack line, falsely saying that Biden and Harris want to take away your gas cards and you won't be able to buy gas cars anymore. I think we have some real challenges in how we talk about EVs going forward and make a better case for that. And so I think that's something we're really gonna spend more time on in the years ahead.
Yeah, no one's the EVs are great. I saw some articles after Helene about people who were powering their home with their EV actually. So feel free to look up those stories. And Brian, that same question to you. What would you say about the election today you wouldn't have said a month ago?
Yeah, a month ago feels like a millennia ago, to be honest with you. If you'd asked me what I think our chances were a month ago, it's probably changed 30, 40 times since then. And maybe it'll change 30 or 40 times more. That sounds like a wild ride in October, but I think I want to sort of double down on Kim's point, which is to say we live in this bubble, right? We sort of consume information at a much higher frequency and live and breathe this stuff. And I'm sure a lot of the folks on the call also like live in this world in a way that the average voter just doesn't. And I think it's easy to forget that the sliver of electorate that is going to decide this election has, for the most part, not even really engaged. Sure, maybe they see it on their nightly news, or maybe they've read a story, or they certainly have been, their friends have posted something crazy on social media, but they haven't really digested information in the same way that all of us have for the last year or 2 years or 4 years. And so there still is room and there's still work to be done there. And so, if there are folks that live around you, or folks in Michigan, pick up the phone and have a personal conversation with them, and it could really make a difference.
Awesome. And because this may be related, I'm going to go back to you for our next question, Brian. How can the people on this call make the biggest impact on the election this year?
Yeah, there's a Chinese proverb that I use a lot that says that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. So basically, it's like anything that hasn't gotten done, like let's do it today. I'm a big believer that most of these campaigns are going to do a great job, or an adequate job at least, of spending money trying to talk to voters. But there is no better advocate for a campaign than a person that that person will listen to you and believe you in a way that they just don't believe TV ads or news reports or direct mail or digital. So again, if I sort of say it tongue in cheek, but it's real. Like, if you have friends or family in Montana or Michigan or Pennsylvania or any of these places where, where big races are on the line, call them. And the bang for your buck there is infinitely better than what a campaign is able to do in terms of an advocacy.
Awesome. I can't agree more. Kim, same question to you.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with Brian again, but I think Brian and Megan can probably speak to this better than I can, but I'd say that elections really do come down to the voters that you can persuade to vote your way and then those that you can get to show up. And so if there are people in your life who are on the fence, who you know care about climate and clean energy, try to remind them of what's at stake and do so in a way that recognizes the issues that are important to them and their day-to-day concerns, which we spoke about a little bit already. And then on the turnout side, offer folks a ride to the polls, help them to make a plan to vote and encourage them to vote early where possible. Like Brian said, the people that you know and interact with on a day-to-day basis, your neighbors and family, they are way more persuadable when it comes to personal interactions than they're going to be saturated by door knocking, text messages, ads on social media, but what's really going to move them is that personal connection.
I'm sure I've gotten a few text messages while we've been on this webinar. Megan, you're gonna finish this one out. What can people on this call do?
Yeah,
Just this question to be clear, the webinar is not over after this. Sorry.
Yeah.
All right.
I would +1 to all of that. Personal connections are the best way to break through, but if you can, go to a swing state and volunteer. All you need to do is show up at a campaign office and they will hand you a packet. It always seems intimidating, knocking on strangers' doors, but for the most part, people are pretty nice and receptive, and it does really make a difference. I'll put in a plug too. We have a program called Green Roots, where we again, this is on the other side of the wall, so I am not involved with it, but would be happy to connect you with my colleagues if anyone is interested. But another great way that we build power for the environmental movement while helping to win elections. We send volunteers as part of the LCV team to campaigns and get a Green Roots t-shirt and show that you're out there because you care about the environment.
Awesome. Yeah, Green Roots is what you said. Okay, great. Green Roots from LCV. And for those, when she says the other side of the wall, for those who don't work in campaigns, it's a campaign finance term that you don't need to worry about. But Green Roots from LCV can help you get involved. Now I'm going to take a few questions from the audience, and we have a couple really good ones here. Megan, I'm going to start with you. You're vice president of paid, which means you're doing stuff on the internet all the time. And so you're constantly seeing misinformation and disinformation. So we have a question from the audience, which is, how do you handle misinformation, especially climate change information with AI, with images, video, and more? This person saw a false AI picture of a child and a dog as part of the Hurricane Helene aftermath.
Yeah. What I've consistently seen as the best way to combat misinformation is to provide more real information and just to drown it out. I think with doctored AI images, that is a whole new challenge that we're going to be figuring out more over the next several years, but generally just getting out real and accurate information using relevant voices and people who are influencers in their communities are important ways to do that. And so, just cranking up the volume in every way we can.
Awesome. Yeah, I saw one of those quizzes, if you could tell whether or not it was an AI photo the other day, and I missed some of them. I was wrong on some of them. So it is getting really challenging. Brian, same question to you. How do you handle misinformation, especially with AI photos and videos?
Yeah, I think it's a question of just respond, just answering it back every time you see it. It's almost like the kind of thing that like we can't ever allow oxygen for because then it takes hold. So I think Megan's point about responding with whatever we can that feels relevant or feels believable to the audience is great. The other piece is being super diligent that we're not part of the problem, right? There's a fair amount of misinformation that it's easy to share because you support it, and it's easy to fall in the trap. So you see how people become victim to this. But so when you're sharing a meme or when you're posting an article, make sure that it's real and legit, and you've verified it before you become part of the problem.
Awesome. And Kim, anything to add on the misinformation question there?
Yeah, I'll say one quick thing, and this is something that came up when I was in the building, lobbyists as well, right? When you're getting false claims thrown at you, and it can be really easy to react to every individual claim, whether it be EV fires or EV batteries, whatever the hot topic misinformation of the day is. But I think, like, in reality, we know the benefits of clean energy addressing climate change. We know that these technologies are proven and effective, and so really sticking to the base messaging and trying to make sure that you're sharing the right information that you know is true and relevant without becoming too reactive. I think, like Megan and Brian said, it's important to respond, but also to kind of keep the facts of facts.
Awesome. And Kim, I'm actually going to start with you for our next audience question. And it's a little bit related, but what do you say to people who deny climate change, even with the most recent evidence of superstorms, drought, shrinking polar ice caps, et cetera?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I mean, I think it's important to tie sometimes natural disasters or those things can seem far off for folks if it's not happening in their specific state. But there are climate impacts throughout the country, right? In Hampton Roads here in Virginia, where I live, for years and years now, there have been roads that when it rains a little too hard, kids just can't get to school. And so I think it can be really moving and maybe make folks drive the issue home for folks when you use issues that are relevant to their communities, whether it be the poor air quality from living near heavily trafficked roads or recurrent flooding. There generally is a climate related issue that does affect people. And if you can connect the dots for them, I'd like to think that though it may not move them all the way to your side, they may be able to start seeing the implications. And then I think another big thing is drawing the impacts for their families and their children is also something that really moves people. Like I said earlier, these technologies are proven effective, and they, beyond just addressing climate change, they make air cleaner for your families, so that they're not facing the kind of day-to-day impacts, but also the long-term impacts. And so drawing the connections to kind of their heartstrings is also a way to potentially move them.
Awesome. Thank you. And Megan, same question to you. What do you say to people who deny climate change, even with the most recent evidence?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's all good advice. I would say, honestly, I don't think we spend a lot of time communicating to them. Fortunately, it's a really small portion of the public. I just had a chance to pull up a poll we did over the summer, and we asked, do you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion of lawmakers who deny that climate change is a threat? And only 18% of voters had a favorable opinion. Even among Republicans, it was only 30%. So I think, luckily that's a pretty small majority at this point that are still climate deniers. And I hope that they will see what's happening around them and come along. But in terms of electoral victories, I don't think that is a group we need to communicate to at this point.
Yeah, with your point of it's a small percentage of people, as digital director, one thing I have to remind myself frequently is the internet is not real life. What I am seeing on X, what I am seeing on Facebook, there's a whole wide world of people out there who are not using it, who are not updating every single day. So yeah, that is good to remind yourself to and help maintain some semblance of sanity in this world. Brian, anything to add from you for what to say?
Well, the only thing I would add is there are pieces of a climate agenda that are in and of themselves good to do, even if you don't start with a fundamental belief that the climate has changed, and or whether you start with or whether you believe that's man-made or not. So, I think to Kim's point, things that reduce pollution or things that make energy cheaper or more affordable, like those are all good things to do that people want to do because we want to do that less and not necessarily because they have an impact on the overall climate agenda. So I think that's a place where if you come to somebody who's just like will not give in on the climate idea, let's talk about the pieces. It's almost like the IRA. The pieces of the bill were so much more popular than the bill itself, and so that could be a different tact.
Awesome. Great. The other one thing I will add to everyone's is try to use language that people know. Clean energy gets so complicated so quickly, and that's by necessity. It's science that all of, like putting up new wires and connecting new energy to the grid is all science. So it is very complicated. But try to talk to folks in an understanding, compassionate way that they understand. All right. I've got one last question for you all. Those were excellent questions. Thank you so much to our audience for those really good questions. So I have one last question for you, and whomever wants to start can. And it is, what makes you optimistic about the work ahead and the next decade of action on climate and clean energy? There's a lot to be pessimistic about, but what are we optimistic about?
Yeah, I can start
Go
here. Oh,
No, go ahead, Kim. Yeah.
okay, I'll go ahead. I can start here just from, we have a bit of a different frame than a lot of the folks working in this space. And I mentioned that when I was talking about our theory of change, which is really focused on the technologies. And so I truly believe that we do have the technologies we need to address climate change. And more than that, there's so much innovation happening right now in the clean energy industry. So that makes me really optimistic. Um, and then in terms of just my day to day, I'm excited by the work that I get to do in painting that picture for everyday folks about what's possible and what the world looks like when you're using solar, wind, storage, and all of these other technologies combined in a way that not only meets our energy needs, but also makes the grid more resilient because you're relying on folks' homes and more distributed resources rather than one central power plant. And so I truly do think that once you're able to paint that picture for folks, it becomes a lot easier to pass legislation and to get their legislators on board. And so just the day-to-day of working with companies that do this work, seeing that those technologies are tried and true, and then being able to talk to everyday people about that is exciting work.
Awesome. Yeah, it is really exciting, and it's exciting to see how many people are excited about this work. A lot of the Counterspark digital list is people who are, teachers and bankers, and they care about this. They aren't working in it every single day, but they still really care. Megan, how about you? What makes you optimistic about the work ahead and the next decade on climate and clean energy?
I think seeing the progress we have made on clean energy investments in these last few years and the very quick impact that it's having. I think we saw a pretty long arc for the popularity of Obamacare over the last decade. And I think things are moving even more quickly on these clean energy investments. So I hope that that will continue to develop. I'm also excited about the fact that we've been able to do that both at the federal level and the non-federal level, like we've talked about before. And I think there will be a lot more opportunities for that over the next few years.
Awesome. And Brian, what about you? What makes you optimistic? You don't always get to finish an elections panel with optimism, but
Yeah, I think it's hard not to be excited about the progress we've made in the last few years or even the last decade, and that certainly got ramped up in the last couple of years. For me, it's the normalization of clean energy, right? I mean, my kids drive it out and they're like, oh, look, there's a wind turbine, and it's a cool thing for them to see because it's big and it moves and it's, they're kids, but it's like their everyday life at this point. And I think that's an amazing place for us to be, that seeing a solar array or seeing a wind turbine down the street is normal, and hopefully we can make it so that it's even more than that.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's also the next generation too, right? Like if you hop on TikTok, I know that's not everyone's jam, but if you hop on TikTok, there are a lot of young folks on there who are very excited about clean energy and climate. So, all right, I think that is it. I really appreciate all of our panelists. Kim, Megan, and Brian are all very focused on the elections. So we have less than a month to go. So I'm sure you are all just slammed with elections work. If you have any questions or you want to get that link with all of the information about voting, please feel free to email me. I put my email on here just because it's a short and quick one to memorize. But yeah, otherwise, thank you for everyone who joined us today. We really appreciate it. And we'll make sure that you get this recording as well. So thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.